Princess of Wales. She certainly had a go-get-'em Californian attitude. She had a career. She had made her mark herself. She didn't need the royal family to become a celebrity or a public figure. But you could say there was a little bit of nervousness within the camp, unhappiness at that time. People were not very happy working for the Duke and Duchess.
When Meghan Markle first entered the royal orbit as Prince Harry's girlfriend, the mood inside the palace was a mix of genuine excitement and quiet apprehension. Harry, by all accounts, was elated. Those around him could see a man deeply in love and hopeful that he had finally found a partner who understood him. Meghan arrived with an impressive resume of her own, a successful acting career, humanitarian advocacy, and high-profile international engagements. She had represented causes at the United Nations, visited U.S. troops overseas, and navigated global media long before stepping into royal life. In many ways, she understood the spotlight without ever having worn a crown. Yet that very independence sparked unease in some quarters. Meghan's confidence and distinctly Californian, go-getter attitude stood in contrast to the reserved, hierarchical culture embodied by Queen Elizabeth II, King Charles III, and the Prince and Princess of Wales. She had built her own platform. She did not need royalty to be known. For palace insiders accustomed to gradual assimilation and quiet conformity, the question lingered, would Meghan seamlessly support Harry's role as a senior royal? Or would her strong sense of self create friction within an institution that prizes tradition above individuality? Concerns intensified as reports from staff began filtering upward. According to multiple accounts, there was growing dissatisfaction among those working for the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. Expectations were high, timelines urgent, and patience sometimes in short supply. Harry and Meghan wanted things done immediately, particularly around their wedding plans, an approach that clashed with the collegial, steady environment fostered by Prince William and Catherine. Within royal households, tone matters, and the perception that staff morale was suffering became a turning point. Still, to frame the rift as something that began solely with Meghan's arrival would be misleading. Research into the brothers' relationship suggests that tensions between William and Harry stretch back to adolescence. The dynamic of heir and spare shaped them in different ways. Harry resented what he saw as preferential treatment William received from their grandmother and great-grandmother. William, meanwhile, envied Harry's relative freedom and leniency during their younger years. Even their visions for royal duty diverged. William gravitated toward conservation and future kingship responsibilities, while Harry believed his military service, including time in Afghanistan, gave him license to speak more forcefully on defense and veterans issues. Each felt misunderstood by the other, and those misunderstandings hardened over time. The contrast between Catherine and Meghan further complicated matters. They came from different worlds, communicated differently, and approached public life with distinct styles. Catherine, however, did try to extend a hand-seeking to guide Meghan through the unspoken rules of royal life. What she encountered, instead, was resistance. Meghan, confident in her experience and achievements, did not feel she needed mentoring. What she underestimated was the nature of the monarchy itself, not a celebrity platform, but a rigid hierarchy where individual ambition yields to collective discipline. As Harry and Meghan chafed against those constraints, their trajectory toward departure became clearer. Sympathy for Harry exists in some circles, particularly when comparing how Catherine was quietly supported and protected early in her relationship with William through advice, security, and institutional guidance, while Meghan was not afforded the same privileges until much later. From Harry's perspective, it felt like one rule for them and another for us. What remained undeniable, however, was that William and Catherine wanted the Sussexes to stay. A slimmed-down monarchy would struggle without them. William even warned his brother that life inside the institution, imperfect as it was, offered more stability than life beyond it. Harry disagreed, and once that decision was made, the fault lines that had existed for years finally broke open, as tensions quietly escalated behind palace walls. The gap between expectation and reality grew wider for Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. What began as optimism slowly turned into frustration, particularly around the question of support. From Harry's perspective, the institution that had shaped his entire life seemed unwilling or unable to adapt when it came to his wife. He felt Meghan was being left exposed to hostile media narratives, while the palace response appeared cautious, slow, and overly procedural. This sense of grievance deepened when Harry compared Meghan's experience to that of Catherine. Catherine had been eased into royal life over several years, quietly advised by seasoned courtiers and shielded as much as possible from press intrusion. By the time she became engaged to Prince William, security and institutional backing were firmly in place. Meghan's entry, by contrast, felt accelerated and exposed. Harry interpreted this difference not as circumstance, but as unfairness, fueling a belief that the system operated on double standards. Inside the palace, however, there was a different interpretation. Senior aides believed Meghan underestimated the constraints of the monarchy and overestimated how quickly centuries-old structures could bend. The royal family, after all, does not move at the pace of Hollywood or modern activism. Decisions are filtered through layers of protocol, legal considerations, and above all, the need to protect the crown rather than individual preferences. What Harry saw as indifference, others saw as consistency. The couple's growing dissatisfaction began to spill into strategy. Conversations about carving out a half-out role retaining royal status while pursuing independent commercial projects circulated well before any public announcement. To the institution, this was a red line. Royal life had always been all or nothing, service without monetization. The idea that senior working royals could selectively opt in and out threatened to blur boundaries the monarchy depended on for legitimacy. Relations between the brothers deteriorated sharply during this period. William, already burdened with preparing for future kingship, grew increasingly alarmed. From his viewpoint, Harry was being impulsive, driven by emotion rather than long-term consequence. William argued that stepping outside the system would not bring the peace Harry expected. He warned that media pressure would only intensify once palace protection was gone. But Harry felt unheard, convinced that remaining inside meant sacrificing his wife's well-being. When the decision finally came, it came abruptly. The announcement of their intention to step back as senior royals released publicly without full internal agreements sent shockwaves through the family. For Queen Elizabeth II, it was not just the content but the method that hurt most. Matters of this magnitude were traditionally resolved privately, with unity preserved at all costs. Instead, the world learned of the split almost simultaneously with key members of the family. The aftermath was predictably bruising. Trust eroded quickly, replaced by suspicion and defensive positioning on both sides. William felt blindsided. Palace officials felt undermined. King Charles III, then Prince of Wales, found himself caught between roles as a father, trying to understand his son's pain, and as a future king tasked with safeguarding the institution. What followed was not a clean break, but a slow unraveling. Negotiations over titles, funding, security, and roles exposed just how incompatible expectations had become. Harry and Meghan believed compromise was possible. The monarchy believed precedent mattered more. By the time agreements were finalized, the emotional damage was already done. The brothers barely spoke. Lines were drawn. And while the world framed it as a dramatic exit, those closest to the situation knew the truth was more complex. This was not a sudden rebellion, but the inevitable outcome of years of unresolved resentment, miscommunication, and fundamentally different visions of what royal life should be. In the months following their departure, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle began constructing a new public narrative, one that reframed their exit not as a choice driven by ambition, but as an act of survival. Free from royal constraints, they now had the ability to speak openly. What followed was a series of revelations that fundamentally altered how the public understood their relationship with the monarchy. The first major turning point came with their high-profile media appearances. Interviews were no longer filtered through palisades or carefully worded statements. Instead, Harry and Meghan spoke directly, emotionally, and at times explosively. Allegations of neglect, misunderstanding, and institutional coldness dominated headlines. For many viewers, it was the first time the inner workings of royal life had been described so bluntly by insiders. The first major turning point came with their high-profile media appearances. Interviews were no longer filtered through palisades or carefully worded statements. Instead, Harry and Meghan spoke directly, emotionally, and at times explosively. Allegations of neglect, misunderstanding, and institutional coldness dominated headlines. For many viewers, it was the first time the inner workings of royal life had been described so bluntly by insiders. Inside the palace, the reaction was one of disbelief and quiet fury. The royal family's long-standing rule, never complain, never explain, left them largely silent in the face of mounting accusations. This silence, while consistent with tradition, created an imbalance. Harry and Meghan's version of events circulated globally with little immediate rebuttal, allowing their account to harden into perceived truth for a large segment of the public. The publication of Spare marked another escalation. In it, Harry laid bare years of personal pain, rivalry, and resentment, particularly toward Prince William. The depiction of William as angry and dismissive shocked readers, but none more so than the allegation of a physical confrontation between the brothers. While sources close to the palace disputed the characterization, the damage was immediate. What had once been whispered family tension was now a global spectacle. For William, the book was not merely hurtful. As the future king, his role depended on public trust and moral authority. The portrayal of internal dysfunction threatened that carefully maintained image. Yet he remained publicly restrained, determined not to be drawn into a back and forth that could further erode the monarchy's standing. Meanwhile, was positioned by supporters and critics alike as a catalyst. Admirers viewed her as a modern woman crushed by an archaic system. Detractors saw her as someone unwilling to adapt to royal constraints. The truth, as ever, likely sat somewhere in between. Meghan had entered the royal world with confidence and independence. but she also encountered an institution that valued hierarchy over individuality. The collision was inevitable. What became increasingly clear was that Harry's conflict extended beyond his brother or even his family. It was a reckoning with his entire upbringing. The heir and the spare dynamic, long discussed but rarely acknowledged, now sat at the heart of the story. Harry believed he had always been secondary, tolerated rather than prioritized. Meghan's struggles appeared to crystallize those long-held insecurities into a single narrative of injustice. From the palace's perspective, however, Harry's public disclosures crossed an unforgivable line. Private conversations, once sacred, were now commercialized. Trust evaporated. Any remaining hope of reconciliation was complicated by the fear that further interactions could later be revealed or reinterpreted in interviews, documentaries, or future books. Public opinion fractured sharply. Some applauded Harry for breaking generational silence and confronting perceived cruelty. Others accused him of betraying his family and exploiting his royal status for profit. The monarchy, once symbolized by unity and restraint, now appeared divided and vulnerable. As the dust settled, one thing was undeniable. The relationship between the Sussexes and the rest of the royal family had entered a new, colder phase. This was no longer a private family dispute. It was an ongoing public saga, with reputations, legacy, and the future shape of the monarchy all hanging in the balance. And while both sides insisted they wanted to move forward, the question lingered. After so much had been said, could there ever truly be a way back? As the fallout from the Sussexes' departure continues to echo, the British royal family now finds itself navigating not just a personal rift, but a long-term reputational challenge. What began as a family disagreement has evolved into a defining chapter for the modern monarchy, one shaped by media narratives, public sentiment, and an irreversible breakdown of trust. At the center of this unresolved tension remains Prince Harry, a man seemingly caught between two identities. On one hand, he presents himself as liberated, free from royal protocol, speaking his truth, and building an independent life with his wife. On the other, his repeated references to the past suggest unfinished business, a deep emotional attachment to an institution he claims to have rejected. This contradiction has become a recurring theme in public analysis of his post-royal life. For the monarchy, the challenge has been how to respond without responding. King Charles III, now firmly established on the throne, has taken a cautious, institution-first approach. His priority has been stability, protecting the crown rather than engaging in personal disputes. Advisors around him understand that any public rebuttal risks legitimizing claims that the royal family is divided and defensive. Silence, though often criticized, is viewed internally as containment. Meanwhile, Prince William has emerged as a key figure in this next phase. As heir to the throne, William represents continuity and duty. Those close to him suggest that the repeated public airing of grievances by his younger brother has hardened his stance. Where there may once have been room for private reconciliation, there is now caution. Trust, once broken publicly, is not easily repaired behind closed doors. Meghan Markle remains a polarizing presence in this story. To supporters, she symbolizes a modern woman unwilling to be constrained by outdated traditions, someone who challenged a system that failed to protect her. To critics, she represents disruption, an outsider who underestimated the complexity of royal life and then rejected it when it did not bend to her expectations. Either way, her influence on Harry's decisions is undeniable, even if the narrative that she led him away oversimplifies years of existing family tension. What is striking is how the Sussex narrative has reshaped public understanding of the monarchy itself. For decades, the royal family carefully curated an image of unity, emotional restraint, and quiet service. The revelations through interviews, documentaries, and memoirs have humanized the royals, but at a cost. The mystique has been replaced by mystique. For some audiences, this makes the monarchy more relatable. For others, it weakens the very idea of a stabilizing national symbol. Social media has played a decisive role in amplifying this divide. Every statement is dissected, every appearance compared, every silence interpreted. Short clips generate global outrage within minutes, often stripped of nuance. In this environment, reconciliation becomes not just a private family matter but a public relations minefield. Any gesture, an invitation, a meeting, even a shared appearance would be scrutinized for hidden meaning. Looking ahead, most royal watchers agree on one point: a full return of Harry and Meghan to royal duties is highly unlikely. The damage is not merely emotional, it is structural. The institution depends on discretion and collective responsibility, while the Sussex brand has been built on personal storytelling and openness. These two philosophies are fundamentally incompatible. That does not mean the story is over. There may be moments of softening, occasional contact, limited reconciliation, especially as time passes and priorities shift. But the relationship is unlikely to return to what it once was. The monarchy has moved on, slimmer and more tightly controlled. Harry and Meghan have moved on to forging a life defined by independence rather than hierarchy. In the end, This saga is about more than titles or protocol. It is about identity, expectation, and the cost of choosing one life over another. For Harry, the price of freedom has been permanent distance. For the royal family, the price of tradition has been the loss of one of its own. And for the public, the story remains a compelling reminder that even the most privileged families are not immune to fracture, especially when private pain becomes public history.